The Knesset, the Israeli parliament, recently voted, just the other day, voted on a bill to hand out death penalties for terrorism. And Piers Morgan had Mustafa Barghouti, a well-known Palestinian activist and spokesman type person from the Barghouti family, one of the most important terrorist families in the Palestinian society. So Mustafa Barghouti was on Piers Morgan, and Piers asked him about this law. I'm going to play the clip, and then I will have a few things to say about it, let's just say. So let's have a look here at Piers and Mustafa Barghouti.
I just want to read what you published on X. You said the Israeli Knesset's approval of a law allowing the execution of Palestinian prisoners is a racist, fascist and dangerous escalation that directly threatens thousands of Palestinian detainees and further entrenches Israel's apartheid system and policy of collective punishment. And that comes along with Amnesty International, who said the law creates a dual legal system because Palestinians in the West Bank face a death penalty as a default in military courts. Well, Israeli settlers in the same territory are tried in civilian courts where the penalty is discretionary and harder to apply. So there is a two-tier legal system clearly being established here. What is your response to this?
Well, exactly. Two different systems of laws for two people living on the same land is apartheid. That's how you classify and identify apartheid. But it is a much worse apartheid than the one that prevailed in South Africa. Even in the worst time of South African apartheid system, nobody dared to say that if a black man kills a white man, he will be executed. But if a white man kills a black man, he will not be judged. That's exactly what this Israeli law says. It's, first of all, it's illegal by international law because Israel has no jurisdiction over occupied territories, as international law says. Second, it is legalizing what is already going on of executing Palestinians. You know, since October 7th, in Israeli jails, in the West Bank and in Israel, 90 Palestinian detainees have already been killed, either by torture, either by starvation, or by deprivation of medical treatment. And more than that, to prove that it is a system of discrimination, there are two very interesting figures. 99% of Palestinian cases taken to Israeli courts are convicted, 99%, while 96% of any Israelis attacking Palestinians or conducting violence will never be convicted. As a matter of fact, out of 10,000 cases of Israeli terrorists, settlers, gangs attacking Palestinians, out of 10,000 cases, only 8 were convicted. So clearly, this is a system of discrimination. But more than that, I said that this law shows how far and how fast the Israeli establishment has gone in the direction of fascism. Imagine, not only they pass such a terrible law, which is considered a war crime by international community, but more than that, they are celebrating it, drinking drinks, celebrating the passage of the law and putting on their chests, men and women, Israeli members of the parliament, putting on their chest, whether they are men or women, symbols and pins of hanged man's knots, the rope that they will use to hang Palestinians.
It was disgusting.
Totally. And more than that, is that the Israel that some Western governments say it's the only democracy in the Middle East? Is this democracy?
Well, it's not democracy. I think when you have a two-tier legal system, that is not democracy. You know, I live in an actual democracy here in the UK, and everybody is treated the same way under the law. There is no two-tier law. If there was a law brought in specifically for one ethnic group that didn't apply to others, all hell would break loose. And yet this seems to have been widely accepted and applauded by most of the Israeli population, according to the polls I've seen.
And that's what worries me more than anything else. It's not just the Israeli government that has moved towards fascism. It's not just the Israeli governing establishment, including 2/3 of the Israeli members of the Knesset, the Israeli Jewish members of the Knesset, but it's the whole society. 90% of the society supports the war now. And the vast majority support such a terrible law. That is dangerous. If I was an Israeli, I would worry very much, because this fascism will not only hurt Palestinians and kill Palestinians as they are doing, it will eat up the Israel from within. And that's why some people in Israel are protesting, because fascism is never good for anybody. And this fascism would not have grown so fast and so big if it wasn't for the world's abstention from establishing sanctions on Israel for committing genocide, for committing collective punishment and starvation against the people of Gaza, for allowing Israeli terrorist gangs to move around and attack every day 10 to 12 communities, burning houses, burning cars, shooting people. That's the result of the weakness of the international community and the absence of sanctions on Israel.
I just want to read.
Let me unmute this. Yeah, that's Mustafa Barghouti. So you hear what he says there. Now, there was one major detail. You might consider it a minor detail. There was one detail of this law, a kind of important detail, I should say, that was left out of his entire comment and analysis. So let me show that to you. Before we do that, though, please make sure to go over to Israel 365 Charity and help us out there. We're helping a lot of families who are struggling with the results of this Iran war, of the missile attacks and all the damage that's being done, kids home with their moms, often who can't work, husbands away fighting the war in reserve duty, a lot of needs on the ground, injuries, loss of property, emotional needs, and social services and the various nonprofits on the ground are stretched thin, and we are stepping up to the plate to help them out, to support the Israeli home front at this time. So go to Israel365charity.com, click Israel Under Fire, and help us with this all-important effort. What I'm going to do now is very, very simple. I'm going to read you the law. I translated it into English, and here's what it says. So this is from the Knesset website, okay? And here's the text of the law in Hebrew, and I'll tell you exactly what this law actually says, okay? Here's what it says. Here we go. The Knesset plenum approved in a second and third reading. The way a law gets passed in Israel, it has to be, it's read 3 times. Each time it's voted on, changes are made, and then it's voted on again. It's in the second and third readings, the death penalty for terrorists bill 5786, 2026, proposed by member of Knesset Limor Son Har-Melech, MK Nissim Vaturi, and a group of Knesset members. 62 members of Knesset supported the proposal compared to 48 who opposed it, 1 abstained. The opposition's reservations to the bill were rejected. Now, here's what the law proposes. You ready? It proposed to determine that the Minister of Defense shall instruct the commander of the IDF forces in the region to amend the order regarding security provisions applicable in the Judea and Samaria area such that, here we go, it's for residents of Judea and Samaria, that's what's called the West Bank, Palestinian areas, excluding an Israeli citizen or resident of Israel, we'll get to that in a bit, who intentionally caused the death, intentionally killed a person in the act of terrorism, shall be subject only to the death penalty unless the military court finds that there are special circumstances justifying the imposition of a sentence of life imprisonment. Okay, so the minor detail that Barghouti left out, that Piers Morgan didn't mention, is that this law only applies to murderers. Murderers. This is death penalty for committing murder when it is defined as an act of terrorism. We'll get into that more in a bit too. It is further proposed to determine that the authority of a military court to impose this sentence shall not be contingent upon a request by the prosecution, a unanimous decision of the panel, or the requirement that the judges be of a rank no lower than lieutenant colonel, meaning they're removing some of the restrictions that made it more difficult to give a death penalty to terrorists in the past. It also proposed to determine that the commander of the IDF forces in the region shall not be authorized to pardon, commute, or mitigate a death sentence imposed by this offense being murder. In addition, it is proposed to amend the penal law such that a person who causes the death of another with the intent to negate the existence of the state of Israel under circumstances of an act of terrorism shall be subject only to death or life imprisonment. It is also proposed to determine that the authority of the court to impose the death penalty for offenses under the penal law, under the law for the prevention of punishment of the crime of genocide, shall not be contingent upon a request by the prosecution. It is further proposed to determine that a death sentence under this law shall be carried out by hanging within 90 days from the date it becomes final, and to authorize the Prime Minister to request that the court delay the execution for special reasons for a cumulative period not exceeding 180 days. We don't want murderers sitting in our prisons long term. That's what we don't want. And then ultimately getting released in prisoner exchanges. That's the idea here. Okay. It is also proposed that to amend the basic law, the government, that's kind of like the Israeli, sort of like constitution, such that the government shall not be authorized to order the release from imprisonment of a person convicted, suspected, or accused of an offense punishable by death. In other words, murder. In addition, it is proposed to amend the prison's ordinance and establish arrangements regarding the conditions of separation of a person sentenced to death, restrictions on access to them, and the confidentiality of the execution. Finally, it is proposed to amend the Victims of the Crime Rights Law such that the right of victims of the offense to receive updates from the Israel Prison Service regarding the date of execution shall be anchored. Okay, that is the translation into English of this law. Now, let me just make this real simple for the Piers Morgans of the world who don't quite understand how the world actually works. You see, this is a death penalty for committing murder when it is an act of terrorism. And why does it exclude Israeli citizens? Oh, you have different laws for Israelis and for Palestinians. Because, okay, you ever notice that in a war, when you kill people, you don't have to put them on trial and have witnesses and have a court case and find evidence, but you kill your enemy in war? Why? Because it's a war. Because you're fighting someone who is trying to destroy your country. That is the way war works. Now, terrorism, in the old-fashioned world, it would be like you're either at war or everyone's, you go out to the battlefield with your swords and your horses and you go to war. Well, war is a bit more complicated when you have this thing called terrorism. What is it exactly? Well, you have people who live, in the case of the Palestinians, within the borders of our country and our domain, and they don't identify as citizens of our country. They don't identify with our country at all. In fact, they openly say they want to destroy the country, and they commit acts of war against it. So what's an act of war? What's an act of war against the country from within? It's what we call terrorism, you see. So when they commit acts of murder in the context of wanting to destroy the state of Israel, we're putting that into a different category. It's not a normal murder. It's not a normal act of violence. It's actually an assault on the state of Israel, but it is a murder. These are all about murders. It's about putting murderers to death. Okay, it's not all that controversial to have a death penalty for murderers under circumstances where the murder was in the context of wanting to actually destroy the state of Israel. What? Oh, they should be given the same rights as loyal Israeli citizens? I mean, or even Israeli citizens who commit crimes. Again, these are people who refuse to accept the state of Israel. They want to destroy the state of Israel. And he's complaining that they don't have the same rights as Israeli citizens. That's not apartheid. That's saying we have this unique situation where we have a population of sworn enemies of the state of Israel. Look, let me say one more thing about this, okay? And this should really be, the last thing I say about it. It's so ridiculous. He's saying that, like, oh my gosh, Israel is saying it's the only democracy, and they're going to have this death penalty. They're going to have this death penalty for Palestinians, for murderers. Why isn't he complaining about the fact that there's a death penalty for apostasy, for leaving Islam? If you're a Muslim and you choose not to be a Muslim anymore, and it's found out in Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Mauritania, Qatar, and Yemen. In all of those countries, there is a death penalty on the books for leaving Islam. Why is that not, Mustafa Barghouti? He should be like offended, like this is so anti-democratic. Or here's an even better one. In the Palestinian Authority that Barghouti is a part of, there is a death penalty that is carried out for selling property to a Jew. Oh yeah, that is true. Selling property to an Israeli or to a Jew is punishable by death in the Palestinian Authority. Wait a second, isn't that apartheid? I can sell property to another Palestinian, and that's fine, but I can't sell property to a Jew because that's punishable by death. You know why? Because if you're, from a Palestinian perspective, if you're selling property to a Jew, you're undermining the nation of the Palestinians. Yeah, that's how they justify it. Kind of similar to the way we view terrorism, like you're kind of trying to undermine our country. This whole thing's ridiculous. It's not that controversial a law. Everyone's making a huge deal out of it. The purpose of this law is to prevent our judicial establishment and our left-wing leaders and our capitulating leaders from continuing to amass larger and larger numbers of these terrorist murderers in our prisons and then releasing them in prisoner exchanges where we just put them back into Palestinian society where they then commit more acts of terrorism. We want to put an end to that cycle once and for all and actually have a real deterrent to committing murder. That's what this law is about. It shouldn't, it's not all that controversial. And frankly, I'm thrilled that it passed.